In a world where love looks perfect, the truth can be devastating. She was building an empire, carrying new life, and trusting the man beside her, until one quiet discovery shattered everything. While she dreamed of a future, he had been planning his escape, convinced he would walk away with half
Darling,
of what she
keep
built.
smiling.
But he made one fatal mistake.
We wouldn't want anyone to know our little secret, would
Because what
we?
he thought was his to take was never his
This
to
liability
touch.
clause
And
in
when the
Section
truth comes
4
to
needs
light,
to be addressed
it's not
before we
just a marriage
proceed.
that
I agree.
collapses.
We'll
It's
cap
his
the
entire
exposure,
illusion of
then we
control.
move forward with the signing.
From betrayal to rebirth, this is the story of a woman who didn't just survive. She rewrote the rules of the game. The lesson? Not every loss is a failure. Sometimes it's protection. The strongest foundations are built in silence, long before anyone tries to tear them down. And the moment you choose yourself, everything changes. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and support the channel so we can keep bringing you more powerful stories like this. Thanks for watching.
The server fans hummed a low, constant drone, a sound Dr. Evelyn Reed barely noticed anymore. 8 months pregnant, she padded across the polished concrete floor of her office, the San Francisco skyline a glittering panorama beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass. She was reviewing the cognitive learning results of her life's work, an artificial intelligence that was about to redefine everything. A soft chime echoed from her workstation. It was an alert from her public records data scraper, a tool she used to feed her AI urban development patterns. The subject line was a property ID number, her own. The alert noted a preliminary title search on her Pacific Heights mansion. The request was filed 3 days ago by Sterling Vance & Associates, the most ruthless family law firm in the city. 3 days ago, she was at the museum gala with her sister Olivia, laughing about baby names. 3 days ago, her husband Marcus, a real estate mogul, had told a reporter she was his visionary. 3 days ago, while she felt their daughter kick for the very first time, he had launched his assault, convinced he was about to claim half of the empire she had built from a single line of code. He had a plan. He had a team of lawyers. He had a secure folder on his server labeled Project Ascension. But there was a single paragraph in an investment agreement he'd signed 6 years ago when Evelyn Reed was just 28 that he had never truly understood. When Sterling Vance received the discovery files, he expected to find the keys to a $10 billion kingdom. What he found instead was a joint checking account holding $112,000, a mansion in Pacific Heights, and a late-model Tesla. Marcus Thorne had spent a year mapping out his conquest of a fortress that was never on the battlefield, and now a private judge was about to walk him through his mistake, line by painful line. Follow Evelyn's journey, because this chapter isn't about wealth. It's about the firewalls a woman builds when she thinks no one is looking, and the power she wields when someone finally tries to test them. This story is a reminder: your greatest asset is never what's in a bank account. It is the framework you designed in private, the conditions you established before you were famous, and the absolute clarity you find when you realize you've been building a life with the wrong person. If Evelyn's story resonates with you, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they held all the cards, tell us your story in the comments. Every voice makes this community stronger. Like this video if you're still watching, share it with a friend who needs this reminder, and subscribe, because every week we bring you a new story of women who were written off, only to write a new ending. We'll see you next time. The first warning sign wasn't a text message. It was a single line of automated code in a sea of public data. Dr. Evelyn Reed shifted, trying to get comfortable in her chair, a difficult task at 36 weeks pregnant. On her screen, the data streams from her AI were flawless. Her sister and CTO, Olivia, was walking her through the final benchmarks before their public launch. Her office was a glass box in the clouds, with the Golden Gate Bridge framed perfectly in the distance. The primary monitors showed the neural network's predictive accuracy at 99.7%. Evelyn had built this company, this view, this existence, from a single algorithm she coded as a doctoral student. She was in a simple gray dress, feeling the quiet power that comes from knowing you're about to change the world. Her laptop chimed. She figured it was Marcus. He often sent her pictures around this time of day, usually from the top floor of his latest skyscraper or the deck of a friend's yacht. His world of concrete and steel, a stark contrast to her universe of data and logic. She wasn't wrong that the notification involved Marcus, but it wasn't from him. Evelyn clicked the data scraper alert. It wasn't a message. It was a link to a new filing in the city's property database. Her mind, trained to find the one flawed pixel in a million, scanned the metadata. She saw the requester, Sterling Vance and Associates, and then she saw the reason for the inquiry, dissolution of marriage. Her blood ran cold. With a strange, robotic calm, she opened a new tab and pulled up the county court's public portal. She said to her sister, "Olivia, run a full diagnostic on the core processors. I think there's an anomaly in the system." She typed in his full name, Marcus Thorne. The page loaded, one result. She clicked the link. The PDF opened, displaying the seal of the Superior Court of California, and beneath it, in stark, formal lettering, were 4 words: Petition for Dissolution. Petitioner, Marcus Thorne. Respondent, Dr. Evelyn Reed. She read the line once, then again. Her eyes locked on the timestamp in the corner. 3 days ago, they were at the symphony's opening night. She had worn a black silk gown, and Marcus had placed his hand on her stomach for the cameras, whispering to her, "You're building my dynasty." That was 3 days ago. He had filed 3 days ago. She was standing in the headquarters of her own creation, looking out at a city she helped to map, staring at a digital request to tear her life apart. Olivia's voice was quiet. "Evelyn, are you okay?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "I am." Her voice was perfectly flat. She observed this with a kind of scientific curiosity, a perfect waveform without a single tremor. She closed the browser. She turned back to her sister. She smiled. She gave her final notes on the launch sequence. She looked at the faces of her engineering team on the video conference and thought, "He filed? He actually did it. I am 8 months pregnant and on the verge of the biggest tech launch of the decade, and my husband is divorcing me." She didn't feel rage. She wasn't prepared for sorrow. When she couldn't compute an emotion, she defaulted to protocol. It was her way. An early investor once called it her superpower. Marcus had called it being cold. They were both correct. She ran her protocol now. 1. The baby is healthy. The last scan confirmed it. Heartbeat is strong. Growth is on track. The baby is the mission priority. 2. Call Arthur. Arthur was her first investor, her mentor. He would have the original files. 3. The Genesis clause is non-negotiable. It was always non-negotiable. She was still cycling through the steps when her team began to sign off the call. Olivia came over, her eyes searching Evelyn's face, then flicking to the laptop she had just closed. "Evelyn?" she asked. "First, let's check on our primary objective," Evelyn said, laying a hand on her belly. "Then we can talk." "I'm fine," Olivia said, her tone confirming she knew Evelyn was anything but. She laid her hand over her sister's, a familiar gesture of support. A moment later, a powerful rolling kick pushed against their palms. The movement was strong and definite, a tiny life making its presence known, completely unaware of court filings and legal betrayals. Evelyn felt it. She took a deep breath. The kicking continued. She thought, that's the only data point that matters right now. After the call, she went to the parking garage alone. The cool, quiet air was a relief. She settled into her car. She had the divorce petition displayed on the passenger side screen. In 6 weeks, a child's car seat would be anchored there. She sat in the driver's seat. She called Marcus. Voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. She sat in the silent vehicle, her phone in one hand, the petition glowing beside her. The low hum of the electric engine was the only sound. Her own breath. She opened a social media app. A notification from 3 days ago. The development firm's official account had tagged Marcus in a photo gallery. It was a picture from a team retreat in Napa. Marcus was holding up a wine glass, his arm draped easily over the shoulder of a new intern, a young woman named Chloe. "Did you see it?" Evelyn asked. Olivia's voice came through the car's speakers. "See what? The performance metrics? It's already spreading through the tech blogs. The hype is incredible. The petition, Evelyn said flatly. Marcus filed for divorce. The silence on the other end was absolute, lasting exactly 3.1 seconds. Olivia was a data analyst too. Then she asked, when? 3 days ago, Evelyn replied. Another pause, this one longer, more deliberate. Evelyn, Olivia said, her voice suddenly as sharp as etched silicon. Does he have any idea what's in the Genesis clause? Evelyn looked at the image of Marcus and Chloe on her screen. She thought about the initial seed money. She thought about Arthur. She thought about the clause Arthur had insisted on, calling it his deal breaker. The one that legally defined her source code and all intellectual property derived from it as a premarital, non-divisible asset, shielded in perpetuity from any and all future personal claims, untouchable. For the first time since seeing the flight confirmation, something other than dread chilled Eleanor's blood. No, she stated, her voice steady. He does not. She started the Tesla. She drove towards Marcus Thorne's venture capital firm in the Seaport District. The sleek waterfront building rose against the gray sky, a monument to the new Boston Arthur always claimed to be building. For a decade, Eleanor had known this place. She was used to the energetic buzz of the lobby, the whisper-quiet ride in the elevator to the penthouse on the 20th floor. This office, more than any house she and Arthur had shared, felt like the foundation of her world. She pulled into her designated spot and headed inside. The firm's reception was a masterclass in modern power, all reclaimed wood and brushed steel, a temple built on disruptive technology. Marcus Thorne was in his early 50s, with the sharp, patient gaze of a man who had backed countless long shots that became unicorns. He had been her most vocal champion since she was a 20-something PhD with a revolutionary gene sequencing patent. He was already standing at his office door before Eleanor's heels had finished clicking across the polished concrete floor. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, no tie, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled. He took one look at his protege's face, then at the phone clutched in her hand, and his warm expression vanished, replaced by a cool, professional mask. He held the door open. "Come in, Elle," Marcus said. "I'll have them bring some tea." "He's already lawyered up. Marcus is ready," Eleanor said, the words feeling like they belonged to someone else. Marcus paused, a flicker of grim understanding in his eyes. "To the conference room." The conference room in the Back Bay penthouse was minimalist and serene, smelling of the sandalwood incense Marcus burned to help him think. Eleanor sank into a leather chair at the massive live-edge table, the same table where she'd pitched her company's seed round, the same table where she and Marcus reviewed quarterly growth projections. She placed her phone on the cool wood, its screen still glowing with the flight details. Marcus had the tea brought in. He moved with quiet purpose, pouring the steaming water himself, selecting a specific oolong from a wooden box. He performed these small actions with the deliberate calm of a man who knew that life-altering news had to be grounded by familiar ritual. He slid a cup in front of Eleanor and took the seat across from her. Eleanor stared at the phone. She tapped the screen, re-illuminating the email confirmation, the booking details. She saw the purchase date, 3 days ago. "He was at our birthing class with me last night," Eleanor whispered. "He was practicing breathing exercises. He wanted to know if I'd decided on a final paint color for the nursery." Marcus laced his fingers around his own cup, his expression unreadable, though he didn't drink. "He put his hand on my stomach," Eleanor continued, her voice fracturing. "He felt our son kick." She stopped, the reality of it landing not as a single thought, but as a full-body impact. He had already retained a lawyer. He had sat beside her, feeling his own child move inside her, discussing paint swatches for that child's room, all while he was already orchestrating the end of their marriage. He had looked her right in the eye, with his hand on her pregnant belly, and had revealed nothing. A calm, cold voice rose in her mind, detached and precise, because the truth itself was too chaotic to process any other way. Asterisk. He sat right there. He talked about the nursery. He already knew. She picked up her phone, navigated to her calendar, and scanned the past few days. 3 days ago, a site visit for the new lab space, lunch with the board of directors, a 3-hour grant review call with the NIH. She had been operating at the apex of her career, so proud of the company she was scaling, completely oblivious that across town, her husband was instructing his attorneys to dismantle their life. 2 days ago, Arthur came home late. She had made risotto, the simple, comforting kind she made when she was too exhausted to think. He claimed he wasn't hungry, that a potential tenant had taken him out for a last-minute dinner. He kissed her on the temple. She remembered thinking the kiss felt perfunctory, a routine gesture. She had chalked it up to her own fatigue. Last night, the birthing class. He asked about the paint colors. She'd said she was leaning toward a soft sage green. He had only grunted, his attention already back on his phone. An hour ago, a text message at 4:30 in the afternoon. Asterisk deal closing is running long. Will be a late one. That was it. And now this conference table, this glowing screen, this cup of untouched oolong. Did you know? Eleanor asked, the question rising not from a place of accusation, but from a deep, desperate need for solid ground. Did you have any idea this was happening? Marcus considered the question with the same methodical focus he applied to a Series B funding round. I suspected the version of himself he sold to the world wasn't the full prospectus, Marcus said at last. I just never knew when he'd let you see the risk assessment. Eleanor nodded, staring down at her hands on the table, at the brilliant cushion-cut diamond on her finger. Marcus's eyes flicked past the ring. My personal counsel is available this afternoon, he said instead. They are waiting for you. Eleanor's phone buzzed on the tabletop. She glanced at it. It was Simone. A link was attached to the text. The message read, asterisk, I am so sorry. I should have sent this the moment I saw it. I just kept hoping I was wrong. Eleanor tapped the link. It opened a local society blog. A photo gallery from a charity gala held 2 weeks ago. Eleanor had missed it. She'd been battling a wave of first trimester nausea, and her doctor had ordered her to rest for a couple of days. She'd told Arthur to go, to represent them both. In the background of a candid shot, Arthur stood with a striking woman, a raven-haired architect in a sleek emerald green dress. His hand was placed possessively on the curve of her hip. It was not how a man stands with a professional acquaintance. It was not a casual gesture. Eleanor stared at the photo, her mind snapping back to that evening. 2 weeks ago, she had been on the sofa, propped up by pillows, watching a documentary on CRISPR technology, nibbling on saltine crackers because nothing else would stay down. She had texted Arthur at 10 p.m. to say she was heading to bed. He had replied instantly, asterisk sleep well, my love. She placed her phone on the table, screen down. There's another woman, she said, her voice hollow. Katerina Vance, from the Sterling Group. Yes, Marcus said, the single word heavy as if he'd been holding it back for months. You knew about her? I had my suspicions, Marcus corrected gently. I had no confirmation. Eleanor picked up her phone and called Simone. How long? She asked, the moment Simone picked up. 2 weeks, Simone said, her voice full of anguish. I saw them at the gala. I am so sorry, Elle. I just thought, with the baby, you were so happy. I convinced myself I was misreading things. You weren't, Eleanor said. No, Simone replied, her voice gaining strength. I wasn't. I am so sorry. Eleanor took a long, deep breath. That internal voice spoke again, no longer questioning, but stating a hard, undeniable fact. Asterisk, I am not imagining things. Honor, asterisk. For months, I felt him pulling away, and I told myself it was just work stress, my hormones, the pressure of building our empires. I wasn't wrong. I knew. Call your lawyers, she said to Marcus. Tell them I need a full accounting of Arthur's real estate shell corporations. I need every LLC, every offshore fund, every single transaction record. I want the full financial x-ray of my marriage. The wheels are turning, Eleanor replied. He's expecting you at 4. Ava hung up and met her mentor's eyes. Eleanor wasn't looking at her with pity or with anger. It was an expression far older and more resilient than either. It was the look of a woman who had sat at a similar polished table 3 decades earlier, learned a devastating truth about the man she'd built a gallery with, and had woken up the next morning to brew the coffee anyway. "Drink your tea," Eleanor said, nodding toward the cup. Ava drank. It was hot, laced with honey, and it tethered her to the room. She glanced at the calendar alert on her screen. She glanced at the damning social media post still open on her phone. She saw the date the lawyer's appointment was confirmed. Then she powered down the screen, slipped the phone into her bag, and stood up. "I have to go see Marcus," she said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "You do." Marcus Thorne's law firm occupied the top floor of a glass skyscraper in Boston's Seaport District. He had held the corner office for over a decade. The space was sleek and minimalist, lined with contemporary art instead of dusty legal books, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the harbor, a perspective that gave the illusion that the city's restless energy could be tamed. Ava sat opposite him at 4:15 that afternoon. She hadn't changed out of the clothes she'd worn for that morning's gallery installation. The idea of returning to the penthouse she shared with Julian was nauseating. Marcus was in his late 40s, a man who had navigated so many high-stakes divorces that he'd perfected the delivery of catastrophic news with a mix of surgical precision and genuine empathy. A tablet lay on the desk before him, already glowing with charts and figures. "Before we dive into the asset strategy," he began, "I need to ask, how are you holding up? And the baby?" "The baby is fine," Ava said, her voice firm. "My OB-GYN confirmed it this morning." "Good," Marcus said with a decisive nod. "That is the only thing that is non-negotiable." Then he swiped to the first slide, and they began. For the next 45 minutes, Marcus laid out the entire intricate architecture of Julian's tech empire. Ava understood the basic outline. She was a savvy gallerist with her own business, but she had never seen it mapped out through the cold lens of a divorce, with the singular goal of exposing what her husband's legal team would fight to conceal. What was legally hers to claim, Marcus explained in his calm, steady voice, was almost nothing. The Ethereum Holdings entity was an impenetrable fortress constructed by Julian years before he met her after his first startup partner's messy divorce nearly sank the company. Julian's response was to build a financial bunker. He had worked with top international finance lawyers to firewall every asset. What Ava Hayes personally had access to, in her own name, on that afternoon was this: a joint checking account with just over $40,000, a small personal investment portfolio with a balance of about $15,000, which she managed herself, her car, a late-model hybrid SUV worth maybe $80,000, her art collection, and her clothes. That was the entirety of it. What Ava Hayes did not have a claim to, the magnificent waterfront penthouse she and Julian called home, which was owned by an Ethereum Holdings LLC, her husband's substantial salary, which was structured as a modest base pay, with the rest dispersed as stock options into a Cayman Islands trust. His equity in the company, shielded by the trust. The family ski chalet in Aspen, shielded by the trust. The vast web of investment portfolios managed by the trust's advisors. The ownership stakes in dozens of smaller tech firms across Europe, all held by sub-entities under the trust's control. The international real estate, a similar setup. Marcus presented it with methodical precision, chart by chart, document by document. Julian's team, Marcus said, will file to divide marital assets 50-50. They will anticipate a portfolio worth tens of millions to split. He let that sentence hang in the air. What they will actually find, Marcus continued, is a joint checking account with $41,300 and a used SUV. Ava stared at the data displayed on the large screen. She thought back to the first time Julian had asked about her family's financial structure. They had been dating for 6 months. She had seen his questions as genuine curiosity, believing he was fascinated by her world and wanted to understand the legacy she came from. She had thought it was the feeling of being truly seen. She had happily explained the basics of their family office and the philanthropic foundation they ran. She had even sketched out the organization on a napkin for him at a cafe, feeling proud of her family's history and the work they did. She remembered now how his eyes followed every line as if he were committing it to memory. The recollections began to form a new picture, not like a sudden tidal wave, but like a slow, freezing fog rolling in. Their first date, he had clearly researched her. At the time, she'd found it endearing. He knew her favorite obscure sculptor, knew she preferred Sancerre to Chardonnay, knew she'd done her master's at the Courtauld in London. This man, she had thought, is so incredibly attentive. She saw it now with chilling clarity. This man was so incredibly methodical. The proposal, it happened at her family's summer home on Nantucket, out on the bluff, with him on one knee as her father watched, smiling from the porch. Ava had been 31. She had just secured a major international artist for her gallery. The timing had felt perfect, as if the universe was aligning to present the most beautiful version of her life all at once. She understood now that he had timed the proposal to coincide with her professional triumph. The conversation about a prenuptial agreement, he had been so insistent, with a sincerity she now recognized as a masterful performance, that he refused to even consider one. A prenup, he had claimed, was like writing the divorce papers before they'd even picked out the wedding invitations. He swore he loved her for her, no strings attached. She had been deeply touched by the romantic declaration. That was the first massive red flag, Marcus said, almost as if he were reading her mind. A man with a complex financial future who refuses a prenup isn't a romantic, he's a strategist. He was positioning himself, Ava said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Precisely, Marcus Thorne confirmed. The gallery fundraisers, about a year into their marriage, he'd started attending them with her. He asked surprisingly insightful questions about artist contracts and consignment terms. She had seen it as the mark of a devoted husband, thinking his keen interest in her passion was a sign of love. She realized now he was conducting market research. The moment of sickening certainty had arrived on a cold Tuesday in November, just last year. Julian was supposedly on a 3-day business trip to Chicago for a tech conference, which had been extended to 5 days. His reasons for the delay were plausible. She hadn't questioned them, but a strange unease lingered after he returned. That night, wide awake, she found herself in their study, opening her laptop to sort through their shared digital receipts for their accountant, a chore she'd been avoiding. Reasons a man hides money from his wife. She had typed the words into the search bar, seen the links populate, and felt a jolt, snapping the laptop shut as if it were hot. A suffocating wave of shame washed over her, the kind you feel when you catch yourself thinking something truly ugly. Who even types that about their husband? What did it say about her, about them, that she was secretly looking for something so vile while he slept in their bedroom? She pushed the laptop away, went into their living room, and began to completely rearrange their bookshelves. Every novel, every art book. She sorted them all by the author's last name, then by publication date. By 3 a.m, the entire library was in perfect chronological order. She never searched for that phrase again. I reorganized 200 books at 1 a.m., she thought, sitting across from Marcus, a wall of digital evidence between them, because I couldn't bear to face the question I was really asking. She said the words clearly, her voice a quiet storm. Marcus gave her a look of profound respect. It is a very common coping strategy, he told her. The mind finds ways to protect itself from information it is not ready to process. Mine was protecting the wrong assets, Eleanor replied grimly. When their discussion was over, Marcus walked her to the private elevator. He said, "My legal team will file the injunctions immediately. They will move on his development accounts before the markets open. Arthur's side will come to the table expecting a generous spousal support negotiation. When they learn what your patents actually collateralize, there will be a very sudden and dramatic shift. What kind of shift? Eleanor asked. The kind, Marcus said, choosing his words with surgical precision, that a man experiences when he finally cracks open the vault he spent years building, only to discover his wife owns the bank. A profound sense of calm settled over Eleanor as she sat in her car in the hushed silence of the underground garage. She didn't turn on the car. She just sat there, her eyes on the concrete wall ahead and focused on her breath. In and out, slow and even, just as her prenatal yoga instructor had taught her. The baby turned inside her a gentle, powerful roll as if their son was getting into position for the fight to come. Eleanor rested both hands on her belly. The brick facade of the building across the street seemed ancient and imposing. The air was crisp with the smell of autumn leaves and city traffic. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed for a moment before fading into the urban hum. The engine of her sedan idled with a quiet, almost imperceptible vibration. She stayed that way for a full 5 minutes, letting her mind go blank. She focused only on her breathing, on the flutter of movement from her son, and she let the dread and the cold and the silence settle around her, making no effort to name it or push it away. Finally, she put the car in drive, not toward the Beacon Hill brownstones she shared with Julian. She drove west, toward the sprawling family home in Brookline. She couldn't bring herself to walk through that front door just yet. 2 days later, her brother David called with an update. Eleanor was at the long mahogany table in the Brookline library, her tablet displaying the clinical trial data David had sent over. At 35 weeks pregnant, sleep was a distant memory, and she was picking at a dry scone, the only thing she could stomach. A lukewarm cup of herbal tea sat beside her. I need to tell you something, David said, and I want to be clear that my security team found this completely by the board during the system diagnostic I ran on your home network. It was all logged on a local server. Just say it, David, Eleanor said, her voice thin with fatigue. For the last year and a half, Julian has been running a specialized software on his office computer to secretly catalog your family's holdings, David explained. The art collection, the rare books, the wine cellar, even the intellectual property. He was creating a master list, cross-referencing everything with auction records and patent valuations from private consultants. The application's log files show everything. We stumbled on it during a vulnerability scan of your network. Eleanor slowly set her teacup down in its saucer. How detailed is this list? She asked, her tone eerily calm. We've tagged over 300 distinct assets so far, David said, and we're pretty sure that's just the beginning. Eleanor was completely still. She pictured her husband's study, the one room in the brownstone he had designed himself, with its dark wood paneling, the leather armchairs, and the antique celestial globe her grandfather had gifted her. She could see herself there, working on a new research proposal, and Julian would appear at the door to say goodnight, leaning against the doorframe with a smile. She had always felt a wave of warmth seeing him there. She had thought, this is a man who supports me. She had interpreted his presence as affection. He was calculating the market value of the globe behind her head. The thought landed with the force of a physical impact. He treated our marriage like a venture capital investment. I told myself his fascination with my family's work was a sign of partnership. It wasn't partnership, it was due diligence. There's something else, David said. Go on. He also had a boutique merger and acquisition firm on a quiet retainer. That started about 18 months ago, Sophia said. They assembled an unbelievably thorough dossier on Vance Biologics using every public filing and data source they could find. It's a very impressive piece of corporate intelligence. And? Amelia inquired. All the high-level data is spot on, Sophia clarified. The revenue streams, the declared value of our physical labs. But it knows nothing about the patent trusts. The true ownership is locked away in private legal structures that are completely offline. They analyzed Vance Biologics as if it were a standard tech company where the COO held a massive personal stock portfolio. They assumed the majority of the company was in my name, Amelia stated. Exactly, Sophia confirmed. He spent a year and a half creating a financial model of you that was perfectly right about the outside and completely wrong about where the actual value resides. Amelia glanced at the lab expansion blueprints on her screen. She remembered Arthur on the terrace of their penthouse in Miami just 2 days before the divorce papers arrived, asking her about the color she'd chosen for the nursery. He had been so attentive, so kind. He nodded with approval when she mentioned the antique rocking horse she'd bought. He had looked at her with an expression she had so foolishly mistaken for love. She understood it now. It was the look of a financier confirming his portfolio was performing as expected. He did all his research, she mused. He spent 18 months planning this acquisition, and he still fundamentally misvalued the company. The next move came the following morning. David called at 8:30 a.m., his voice carefully level, which was always a sign of bad news. Julian's counsel is Robert Kensington, David said. Eleanor knew the name. Everyone in Boston's financial world knew the Shark. He was a legendary corporate raider, famous for his ability to dismantle companies people thought were fortresses. He's already filed a motion for expedited discovery, David went on. He's demanding full financial disclosure within 10 business days. Send everything to Miss Harding, Eleanor said. Already on its way, David confirmed. But Eleanor, Miss Harding wanted me to tell you that Robert Kensington has never lost a high-stakes asset division case in his entire career. He will come at this from every conceivable direction. Perfect, Eleanor said. David was silent for a beat. Perfect? Let him see it all, Eleanor said, her voice like ice. Miss Harding will grant him full access to every document, every trust, every single asset held in my name. There was a short pause on the other end of the line. Oh, David said, and then his voice suddenly sharp with comprehension. Oh. The expected salvo arrived the next afternoon. Eleanor was in Miss Harding's office signing documents when her private cell, the one reserved strictly for family, began to buzz. A brisk, unnervingly cheerful paralegal announced she was with Kensington and Associates, Julian's legal counsel, calling to initiate a conversation about voluntary asset disclosure to streamline the discovery phase. Julian had given them the number, of course. My attorney is Anya Harding, Eleanor said, her voice perfectly measured and cool. All subsequent communications will go through her office. She ended the call. Miss Harding, who had overheard Eleanor's side of the conversation, jotted the firm's name on a legal pad and drew a sharp circle around it. They're moving aggressively, she noted. Yes, Eleanor agreed. They believe they're closing in on the deal of a lifetime. That evening, Eleanor composed a message to Chloe Anders. It was not an accusation. It was a proposition. It read, asterisk. I am writing to you because I suspect you have been deceived by the same man using the same false pretenses. I have information suggesting you were presented with a deliberately engineered financial narrative. I believe you have a right to see the complete picture. To maintain a coordinated front, it was crucial they speak directly. Miss Harding arranged a secure video conference for the following day. Eleanor sat in Miss Harding's office, which featured floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Boston Public Garden. On the large monitor, Chloe appeared, broadcasting from what seemed to be a small, stylish apartment in the Seaport District. She looked much younger than her 27 years, and utterly terrified. She spoke in short, nervous bursts, as if reading from a script she'd tried to memorize. He claimed the marriage was just a business arrangement, that it had been over for years, she said. He had a whole pitch deck, a presentation that detailed his financial strategy for their separation. He told me you personally controlled a huge block of equity in your family's biotech firm, and that Massachusetts law entitled him to half of it. He had the valuation calculated to the penny. He said you hadn't been intimate in years, that you were completely obsessed with your work. He told me the pregnancy complicated his exit strategy, but that you would be generously compensated for the inconvenience. He told me, Chloe went on, that as soon as the separation was finalized, we could start building our life together. He had a detailed investment strategy for our future. He'd already put in offers on 2 condos for us in Back Bay. She stopped, and the distant sound of a subway train rumbled faintly through her computer's microphone. There's an encrypted folder in his presentation files, Chloe said. He named it Project Phoenix. Eleanor glanced at Miss Harding, whose expression was a mask of professional neutrality. Miss Harding's eyes met hers, asking a silent question. What is it you require from us? Eleanor asked, her voice calm and even. A brief hesitation. I want to be completely disassociated from this, Chloe said. I made a catastrophic error in judgment. I thought I understood who he was, and I was wrong. Another pause. I have the entire digital file, the one containing all his research on your finances. He had it sorted by asset type. When I understood what it truly was, her voice faded. This is not a crime I wish to be an accessory to. Would you be willing to submit a sworn affidavit? Miss Harding asked, her tone shifting from that of a concerned advisor to a razor-sharp litigator. Yes, Sophia whispered. A moment passed. I am so sorry. I had no idea what he was truly capable of. I know I made my own choices. I have to live with that, but I never saw the entire plan. Ilara studied the woman's strained face on the video call. Thank you for telling us the truth, she said. We will be in touch. She ended the connection, and the screen went black. The room was silent. The Sterling Protocol, Chloe said, her voice dripping with disgust. Of course, Ilara responded, turning back to the conference table. She was already scribbling notes on a legal pad. That will be our Exhibit A. Chloe looked at her client. How are you, really? Ilara considered it for a moment. Honestly, I'm furious, she said. I am finally incandescently furious. Before this, I was just in shock, then heartbroken. Now I'm angry. Good, Chloe said. Yes, Ilara agreed, not looking up from her notes. It's about damn time. Julian Croft received the asset disclosure portfolio on a Tuesday morning at 9:15. His associate brought it into his office. It was a single, surprisingly slender, leather-bound folder. From Chloe Chen's office, the associate said. A courier just dropped it off. Then he was gone. Julian stared at the folder. He was used to getting disclosures delivered in archive boxes. Voluminous files meant complex fortunes, and complex fortunes meant a landmark case with a jaw-dropping settlement. He had been relishing this fight. He poured a fresh, steaming cup of espresso. He opened the portfolio to the index. He started to read. He turned to the first section. He turned several more. His espresso went from hot to cold on his desk, untouched. The first tab, Personal Liquidity Accounts. 1 checking account, 1 savings account, both with unremarkable balances. He looked at the savings account with a slight frown. $6,482. It was the kind of money a graduate student might have, not the scion of a global hospitality empire. He flipped to the next section. Tangible personal property. 1 vehicle, a 3-year-old Rivian. A jewelry inventory, appraised by a GIA expert, valued at $78,000, with notations specifying most of it was inherited prior to the marriage. He skipped past an inventory of home furnishings. He was hunting for the real prize, the equity statement for the Sterling Hospitality Group, the deeds to the penthouses, the investment portfolios, the executive compensation agreement. He kept flipping through the pages. He went back to the beginning. He reread the cover letter signed by Chloe Chen. It was 3 paragraphs long, written in the meticulously polite prose of a lawyer who had been waiting her entire career to compose a letter exactly like this. The letter affirmed that the enclosed documents constituted a complete and legally certified accounting of all personal assets registered under the name of Ilara May Sterling. It stated that the disclosure was submitted in full compliance with the court's discovery order. It noted that an identical set of documents had been filed directly with the court. It wished Julian and his client a thorough and enlightening review. Julian Croft sat at his massive glass desk with the thin portfolio, his cold espresso, and a few dozen pages that amounted to almost nothing. He picked up his office phone. He dialed Leo. Leo answered on the first ring, his voice buzzing with anticipation. "You get it?" he asked. He sounded like a man who was certain he was about to cash in a winning lottery ticket. "I've received a disclosure," Julian said, choosing his words like a sapper clearing a minefield. "Leo, I need to ask you something very specific. Does your wife have a family trust?" A beat of silence. "Her family basically built San Francisco," Leo said. "They're worth billions. The hotel group alone is—" "Her family," Julian cut in, "may very well be worth billions. Her family's trust, her family's holding company, her family's properties." He let that distinction hang in the air. "Your wife, as a private individual, in her own name, according to the latest certified legal documents from her counsel, is valued at approximately $112,000 in combined liquid and physical assets." The silence that followed on the other end of the phone felt different this time. It wasn't the silence of surprise. It was the sound of a man's future being incinerated by a truth he never considered. "That's not possible," Leo finally sputtered. "I have an encrypted folder full of financial plans that says it is," Julian replied. "I need you to walk me through every single thing you know about her family's corporate structure. Now." Meanwhile, inside her family's Nob Hill townhouse, Ilara was on a call with Chloe. Chloe knew a paralegal at a firm that leased space on the same floor as Julian's. It wasn't spying, not really. It was just how San Francisco worked, a dense network of connections cultivated over generations. The paralegal had texted Chloe at 10:15 to report that Leo Vance had been on a frantic conference call with Julian for over an hour and was refusing all other calls. Ilara processed this news. She felt no surge of triumph. Not yet. She felt the crushing weight of a truth finally being brought into the light. Her thoughts drifted back 6 years. She remembered the first time Leo's hand had closed over hers across a small table at a wine bar in Sausalito, his gaze holding what she had tragically mistaken for genuine admiration. She recalled the first few years, lying beside him in the deep silence of the night, tracing the line of his jaw as he slept, thinking, "Asterisk, this is him, the one I was meant to be with Asterisk." She remembered calling her aunt, her voice a hushed secret from the design studio at the flagship hotel. "I think this is it. I think he actually sees me, not Sterling Hospitality, not the family name, just me." She had yearned to be seen for herself so desperately that the desire had become a blindfold. The voice in her head was relentless now. "Asterisk, I knew." Not the specifics, not the emails with his COO or the calculated divorce projections, but I understood what I represented to him. I just chose to ignore it because seeing it was a price too high to pay. That wasn't a flaw in her character. It was a survival mechanism. But it was finished. 2 days after she'd found the archived financial models on his laptop, Leo made his critical error. He sent a text to Ilara's main phone number, not his burner. The primary line. He didn't mark it urgent. He didn't have to. Her phone was connected via Bluetooth to her car's infotainment system, where she was in the middle of a call with the architect for the new nursery. The plans displayed on the large central screen. The architect saw the text notification pop up over the blueprints on the 12-inch display. She glanced at Ilara. Ilara opened the message and, on pure, cold instinct, allowed it to display fully on the screen for them both to see. Maybe it was a deliberate act of self-destruction. She couldn't be sure. Leo's words filled the screen. He was losing his composure. The cool, confident startup founder who had charmed her family at dinners asking about her pregnancy was gone. This was a man who was cornered and frantic. "You hid the trust documents," the message read, blunt and without preamble. "I have provided a complete and lawful disclosure of all assets held in my name," Ilara texted back, her fingers perfectly steady. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," he replied, the new message appearing instantly. "The Sterling Fund, the hotel shares. You knew what our arrangement was. Ilara glanced across the center console at the architect, who was now studying the air conditioning vents with intense focus. Yes, Leo, Ilara typed. I know exactly what you arranged. A moment of silence. This is far from over. His latest message glowed on the screen. My lawyer is filing a suit for financial misrepresentation. He has proof. Marcus will be thrilled to hear from him, Ilara typed back. She closed her laptop with a definitive click. The conference room was utterly still. One of the junior curators cleared his throat. We will, require a complete record of that conversation, Marcus said, appearing in the doorway. He had slipped in 3 minutes earlier, unnoticed by the captivated curatorial team. That entire exchange is a textbook confession of his monetary motive for this marriage. It's an absolute gift. Our server automatically captures all projected content for the meeting archives, Ben confirmed from his seat. Perfect, Marcus said, striding into the room and placing his briefcase on the polished table. Now, about this misrepresentation claim. 11 days after she had filed for divorce, Ilara returned to the penthouse. It wasn't just an apartment. It was the sprawling residence overlooking Millennium Park, technically owned by her family's trust, which made it untouchable as a marital asset. In every way that mattered, however, it was hers. She had selected the first edition art books for the library, commissioned the custom walnut shelving, and personally cared for the orchids in the winter garden because she had believed, we will have a lifetime for these things to flourish, Julian had moved his belongings out 4 days prior. She had no idea where he'd gone, and she felt no desire to find out. The penthouse was shrouded in that unique silence that settles into a home when the person who was once its main source of sound simply disappears. It didn't feel peaceful, just empty, like a body that appears whole but is aware of a deep internal void. She moved from one room to the next. She stood in the vast professional-grade kitchen and switched on the espresso machine, just as Eleanor had once taught her, saying, "Your hands always need a task." She stood in the library, gazing at the shelves where his architectural monographs were interwoven with her collections of art theory, and thought, I have to unbraid them, She paused at the door to what had been his home office, staring at the empty desk and the faint outlines on the linen walls where his framed magazine covers had hung, and felt absolutely nothing. Finally, she walked to the nursery. The nursery was painted a gentle, muted gray, the color of the Chicago sky over Lake Michigan just before a winter sunrise. The paint swatch had a lyrical name, Harbor Fog, and Ilara had held it in the afternoon light for Eleanor, who had given a small, affirming nod and said, "Yes, that is the one." The bespoke changing table, crafted from reclaimed oak by a woodworker in Wisconsin with small, brushed nickel handles shaped like stars, had arrived just last week. It rested against the northern wall. Ilara ran her fingers along its smooth surface in the dim light, feeling the cool, seamless wood. The mobile that dangled over the crib was made of delicate, hand-blown glass orbs, each a different shade of blue, commissioned from an artist in Pilsen. The books on the shelves were organized by author, classic fairy tales, modern adventures, lyrical poetry, because she had wanted the room to feel like a story waiting to begin. She settled into the glider, an identical match to the one in Eleanor's own home, made by the same craftsman. It molded to her body perfectly. The day it was delivered, she had tried it and thought, I could sit in this chair for an entire lifetime, She didn't sleep. She sat in the gray room at 11 o'clock at night, then at midnight, and then at 1 o'clock in the morning, watching the glass orbs gently rotate in the still air and listening to the rhythm of her own breathing. The sound machine, which the delivery service had inadvertently left on, was emitting the soft patter of rainfall. A sachet of chamomile, which her aunt had tucked into the nursery's curtains, released a faint, calming scent. Outside the windows, the bay pulsed with a low, steady energy. A foghorn sounded in the distance. The old townhouse made its own quiet noises, the gentle sighs of wood and stone settling with the passing years. She started talking to Lily. "I knew," she whispered, her voice a ghost in the dimly lit room, illuminated only by a smart light she'd found, a small glowing orb that projected a soft, starry pattern across the ceiling. Not everything, but enough. I knew something was fundamentally broken, and I looked away because I was so tired of being on my own. Lily shifted inside her, a slow, rolling motion like a turning wave. "I had built this entire career for myself," Ilara whispered, "heading the design for an entire hotel group, a legacy. And I was just so profoundly lonely within it. I just wanted someone to share the quiet moments with." She paused, thinking of the late-night searches of his ex-girlfriend's Instagram, the meticulously organized investment scenarios in his private cloud folder, of the 1,000 tiny instances where she had made a conscious decision to be blind. The most painful thought, the one she had never allowed to surface, finally broke through. At a certain point, being loved for the wrong reasons had felt safer than the possibility of not being loved at all. That was the fundamental mistake. Not in trusting him, but in needing to trust someone so badly that her own desperation became a reason to ignore the questions. She let that realization settle in the quiet room. It enveloped her, free of judgment. The glass orbs were still. The silver starlight glowed. Luna moved again. "I curated my own cage," Ilara said softly. "I designed the beautiful prison, called it a life, and then acted shocked when the man I handed the master key to decided to lock me inside." She took a deep breath. "But you," she whispered, her hand resting flat against her stomach, "you are not a mistake. You are not a footnote in a failed merger. You are the greatest masterpiece I have ever been a part of, and I created you all by myself. I would choose you 1,000,000 times over." Luna gave a swift, decisive kick as if to confirm the statement. It was nearly 3 in the morning when Eleanor appeared in the doorway. Ilara hadn't heard the private elevator chime. The night doorman must have known to send her right up. Eleanor was wrapped in a thick cashmere throw, having clearly come straight from her own apartment nearby. She didn't say a word, just walked over to the wide window seat and gazed out at the shimmering ribbon of lights along Lakeshore Drive. They sat like that for a very long time. "Were you ever afraid?" Ilara asked, finally. "And after Julian left?" Dr. Anya Sharma considered the question with the quiet focus of a career academic. "The morning after he moved out," she said, "I felt an overwhelming sense of inertia. I was 44 years old with 2 children and a university department to run, and I remember sitting on the floor of our empty house thinking, who am I now? What am I without the title of his wife?" She paused, her gaze fixed on the distant silhouette of the Willis Tower. "But then the sun rose over the lake," she continued, "and I got up and reviewed the graduate thesis submissions, and the next day I did it again, and the day after that." She turned her eyes to Ilara. "You don't discover a new path by staring at where the old one ended. You find it by showing up at dawn every single day and taking the next logical step." "I'm just so scared, Anya," Ilara admitted, her voice frail. "I know," Anya said gently. "Not of him, not of the legal battle. I'm afraid I'll get this wrong. That the baby will need something I don't know how to give." Every scholar who has ever attempted to parent has been terrified of that exact unknown variable, Anya replied. "The conscientious ones, at least." A profound calm settled over the provost's office, a stillness that felt more secure than anything Ilara had felt in weeks. Anya took a thick wool blanket from a nearby chair and draped it over Ilara's shoulders. They sat together in the low light of the room, high above the glittering, oblivious city. As the old servers in the corner hummed their steady, low drone and the faint scent of aged paper filled the air, the baby shifted inside its mother's belly, and the astronomy screensaver cast the soft glow of a nebula across the ceiling. They were silent for nearly an hour. Ilara finally drifted off to sleep in the large armchair. When the first pale, gray light of morning slipped through the windows, Anya was gone. Ilara's phone buzzed on the table beside her, a text from Anya. It said, "Thesis reviews are done. The academic day has begun." Ilara sat in the chair in the quiet gray office and felt a small internal shift, like a continent moving an inch. Nothing was fixed, no future was guaranteed, but the fundamental equation had changed. She placed a hand on her stomach and felt the baby stir, as if preparing to face the new day with her. She thought, asterisk all right. We know the next step asterisk. She stood up and went to find the coffee maker. The video call with Sienna was scheduled for Thursday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Ilara was in her brother Marcus's office with her assistant Ben seated beside her. The room was pristine and silent, and the afternoon sun sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, sharp shadows across the marble conference table. Sienna's face appeared on the enormous monitor, broadcasting from her small apartment. The faint sound of a passing elevated train could be heard in her background. Ava would always remember this as the moment the gears shifted, the low, constant hum of Chicago far below the office window serving as the backdrop to Chloe's broken confession. Chloe spoke for a full 20 minutes, the words spilling out in a torrent, as if stopping for a breath would shatter her resolve. This wasn't rehearsed. It was a reliving. Ethan had told her 8 months prior that his marriage was a hollow corporate merger. He'd painted Ava as a brilliant but cold CEO, a woman more invested in her venture capital firm than in her husband, someone who had walled off her heart. He'd sold the story with the exhausted air of a man who had suffered in silence for far too long. He had shown her the prospectus 6 months ago. He'd set his tablet on Chloe's small cafe table and opened the file with the gravitas of a high priest, a sacred text that proved his absolute faith in her. The financial plan was meticulous, with multiple tabs. There were projections for asset liquidation. There was a strategy for post-divorce wealth management. And then there was the password-protected file he called the Lexington Fund. Within 60 days of the papers being served, he'd promised they would be clear. He told her they could start touring penthouses on the Gold Coast. He forwarded her listings for sprawling condos overlooking the lake. He made her feel like his real partner, Chloe said, the one he could finally be with now that he was free from his loveless obligation. And then Chloe's voice cracked. 3 weeks ago, I showed up at his private apartment unannounced. He was on a call with his lawyer, Marco Vance. I only heard bits and pieces. He was rattling off your company's assets like a stock ticker. Holdings, equity stakes, intellectual property, just a list of things to be sold. She hesitated. The Lexington Fund file was still open on his screen. The one about you. I started clicking through the tabs. The distant sound of a city siren wailed. The very first tab, Chloe said, her voice a whisper, was labeled Asset Acquisition. Ava watched her own pale reflection in the dark screen of the monitor. She saw Daniel, whose expression was a quiet storm of fury. What is it you want from us? Ava asked again, though the answer was already hanging in the air. I want to be erased from this, Chloe said. I'm not asking for a thing from you. Not a cent, no help, nothing. I just need to be completely severed from this whole thing. I made a monumental mistake, but I will not be an accomplice to what he's planning. She took a shaky breath. And I believed you had the right to know what he truly is. Are you prepared to sign a sworn statement to that effect? Leo Finch, her lawyer, asked. Yes, Chloe replied. And after a brief pause, she asked, Is the baby all right? I mean, is the pregnancy healthy? Ava was momentarily stunned. The question was so deeply personal, so out of place, that it robbed her of speech. The baby is fine, Ava said, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. Completely healthy. Good, Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible. That's really good, thank you. We will be in touch to schedule the deposition, Leo said. He disconnected the call, and a profound silence fell over the office. The Lexington Fund archives, Daniel murmured. Precisely, Leo confirmed, his fingers already a blur across his keyboard. That, combined with the encrypted chat logs and the lease on that secret apartment, will paint a very damning portrait of intent. Ava rested her hands on the cool, polished surface of the conference table. She could still hear Chloe's voice, a mix of raw fear and crushing regret. The question about her baby. She remembered being 24. She remembered how easy it was to believe the story that made you feel chosen, not just used. Ava had constructed her own version of that very same fantasy a long time ago. She recognized the architecture of that delusion. It was a universe away from forgiving Chloe. Forgiveness was a far more complex algorithm than a 20-minute phone call, but she understood the mechanics of the deception. Daniel asked quietly, "Ava, are you okay?" "I'm reevaluating the projections," Ava said. "I can feel the new variables clicking into place. It's not the future I had forecast, but it will be one I own." Her response moved from emotion to a series of quiet, deliberate actions of reclaiming control. They weren't grand gestures, but methodical digital fortifications. She systematically changed the access keys for all of Harrison Ventures' primary accounts. Not because she suspected Ethan had them, he didn't, but because each new password felt like another firewall going up in a fortress only she commanded. She moved the quarterly board meeting to the following Tuesday. Not an emergency meeting, just a standard review, brought forward by a week. She wrote and distributed the agenda herself instead of having Daniel do it. The break from her normal routine was a clear signal to her team. She called Eleanor. Her mother picked up on the third ring. She spoke with the carefully neutral tone of a judge reserving opinion until all evidence was presented. "I wanted to let you know," Ava began, "that the legal team is moving forward, the baby is healthy, and I'm back at the condo in Lincoln Park." A beat of silence passed. "I will be there in the morning," Eleanor said, stating an indisputable fact. "You don't need to do that." "I will be there in the morning," her mother repeated, but the tone had shifted. It was now the sound of a verdict being delivered, not a topic for debate. Eleanor arrived the next day, settling into Ava's starkly modern kitchen, sipping tea and taking in every detail, which was both her nature and precisely what the moment called for. She brought a bottle of single malt scotch, decades old, and set it on the polished quartz countertop. She sat opposite Ava, her gaze unwavering, projecting an unspoken but absolute solidarity. "I should have been more direct in my initial brief," Eleanor said after a long silence, her eyes on the swirling amber liquid in her glass, "about my assessment of him." "What was your assessment?" Ava asked. Eleanor carefully centered her glass on its coaster. "I concluded he was engaged in discovery." She said, "From the moment he met you, I believed he was studying you, but in the manner an analyst studies a competitor before initiating a hostile takeover." Ava looked at her mother. "I knew it was your decision," Eleanor went on, "and I did not wish to be the one who—" She let the thought trail off, looking back at her glass. "I should have filed a dissenting opinion regardless." "Maybe," Ava conceded, "but I doubt it would have been admissible at the time." Eleanor looked right at her, and her expression didn't soften, but it sharpened with clarity. "No," she said with judicial finality, "it would not have." That night, it was just Ava, Eleanor, and Evelyn, her younger sister, at the large kitchen island. They ate risotto, scotch for the two older women, sparkling water for Ava. The conversation drifted across safe harbors like people carefully crossing a minefield while pretending to admire the scenery. It lasted for 2 hours. The scene itself was the statement, the image of three women from different generations at one table being cautious and flawed and utterly there for each other. It was a picture that needed no explanation. Any woman who has navigated the treacherous waters of a personal crisis has sat at a table exactly like it. The collapse of her marriage didn't start with a scream, but with the quiet chime of a laptop. An alert for a confirmed spa weekend for two at a resort she had never heard of with a name that was not hers had appeared on Ethan's unlocked screen while he was in the shower. That one simple digital crack in their foundation had led her to this moment, to the sterile, high-rise conference room in her lawyer's downtown Chicago office where Leo Finch had just ended a call. "He's doing it," Leo said, his voice flat. "Marco Vance just filed the motion. He's arguing that your husband's strategic advisement was so critical to the recent success of Harrison Ventures that it now qualifies as marital property." A dry, mirthless smile touched Ava's lips. "He actually thinks that networking at a few charity dinners earned him half of my company? It's a long shot," Leo conceded, "but it's designed to get them into discovery. It forces your deposition." He paused. "Which means you are going to have to see him." Ava gazed out the massive window at the city skyline, at the name Harrison carved into the facade of a skyscraper just a few blocks away. "I know," she said, her voice unshakable. "I've been ready for this since the moment I saw that hotel confirmation." The courtroom in the Cook County Courthouse was a sea of polished chrome and cold marble, built to feel both imposing and completely impersonal. It was a sterile room designed for the cold transaction of tearing families apart, devoid of the gravity such moments required. Eleanor arrived with her counsel, Arthur, at 8:45, a full 15 minutes early. At 38 weeks pregnant, a deep, insistent throb had settled at the base of her spine, a rhythm that had started around sunrise. Her doctor had promised this was only a preview. She wore a custom-tailored navy silk dress that, miraculously, still draped elegantly over her stomach, her blonde hair coiled into a tight, polished bun she usually saved for zoning board hearings. Taking her seat at the respondent's table, she placed one slim folder before her and surveyed the small audience. Her lead architect, David, was there. Her senior project manager, Sarah, was there as well. She hadn't summoned them for moral support, but as professional witnesses to a closing deal. Her father, Henry, was also present. Eleanor hadn't needed to ask. She merely told him the time and place. His presence was its own quiet endorsement. Julian Thorne appeared at 1 minute before 9, his lawyer, a man named Peterson, in his wake. He was dressed in a tailored Italian suit that now seemed to hang off his frame, and the charming roguish face that had once graced art gallery society pages now looked gaunt and shadowed. Eleanor registered these facts with a detached, analytical calm that felt unnatural. Half a year ago, the sight of him so worn down would have sparked immediate worry, but that felt like another life entirely. His eyes stayed glued to the front of the room, a pointed refusal to engage that spoke louder than any argument could. He settled at the petitioner's table next to his lawyer, clicked open his briefcase, and aimed his stare at the empty judge's bench, acting as if she were merely part of the furniture. Judge Mercer entered precisely at 9 o'clock, a woman in her late 50s with discerning eyes and an aura of someone who had refereed every conceivable drama among San Francisco's elite. She took her seat with practiced efficiency. "Thorne versus Vance," she announced, her voice crisp and resonant. "We are here to address the petitioner's motion regarding marital contributions to the Vance Real Estate Trust. Mr. Peterson, you may begin." Peterson rose to his feet. He was slick and self-assured, the kind of expensive counsel Julian would gravitate toward. He began his opening statement with dramatic flair, portraying Julian as the visionary curator whose influence had transformed the Vance real estate portfolio. He argued that while the company was long established, it had experienced a cultural and financial renaissance thanks to Julian's elite connections and artistic strategy. He held up glossy society magazines featuring Julian's name alongside headlines about his impeccable taste. Some of the articles were from the previous year. He had a fine art appraiser on standby, ready to testify about the increased value of their property's aesthetics. He spoke for 24 minutes without interruption. When he finished, Judge Mercer peered at him over the top of her glasses. "Mr. Cole," she said, "your response." Arthur stood. He offered a single piece of evidence for the court's review, a heavy, leather-bound portfolio containing the original blueprints for the Vance Tower. "Your Honor, Arthur said, his voice steady. The Vance Real Estate Group was founded by my client's grandfather the same year Eleanor Vance took her first steps. She met the petitioner, Mr. Thorne, 28 years later. The portfolio has certainly grown as any healthy business does, but its foundation, the very empire Mr. Peterson suggests was elevated by his client's recent influence, predates this marriage by almost 3 decades. He then took his seat. Judge Mercer studied the blueprints. She tapped the date stamped in the corner before placing the portfolio down with a thud. Her eyes found Peterson. The courtroom fell utterly silent. It was the silence that descends when a convoluted, emotional dispute is suddenly made brutally, undeniably clear. "Counselor," Judge Mercer began, her voice deceptively calm, the kind that signals a coming squall. "Are you seriously contending in my court that your client's selection of lobby art is the core asset behind a 30-year-old real estate development firm?" Peterson's jaw worked, but no sound came out. "I want to ensure I fully grasp your argument," the judge continued. "Please tell me the specific action your client took that fundamentally reshaped the value of a company that was a market leader before he was old enough to have a driver's license." Peterson fumbled, gesturing to his charts and pointing at revenue increases over the past 3 years. Judge Mercer then turned to Eleanor's lawyer. "Mr. Cole, do you wish to speak to this recent growth?" Arthur produced a second folder, which demonstrated that the revenue spike was the result of a long-term commercial lease with a tech giant, a deal the Vance Group had initiated 5 years before Eleanor and Julian had even been introduced. It had zero connection to art curation or social climbing. Judge Mercer scanned the lease agreement for less than a minute. "Motion denied," she declared without inflection. Julian's lawyer, Peterson, quickly changed tactics, attempting to argue that their Pacific Heights mansion was a marital asset to be divided. Eleanor's counsel, Arthur, responded by presenting the property's title, which explicitly stated it was owned by the Vance Family Trust, deeded to Eleanor and her direct descendants. "Motion denied," Judge Mercer repeated, her tone hardening. Peterson then began a third argument about a shared art collection, and then a fourth, each more desperate than the last. By the time he started his 5th try, the judge was done. She took off her glasses and leaned into the microphone, fixing her gaze on Peterson. "Motion denied, motion denied." With those final 2 words, it was all over. What Julian Thorne would receive from their 2-year marriage was his classic Porsche, his collection of art history books, and the remaining funds in his personal brokerage account. He would receive no spousal support. Child support for their son would be calculated based on his declared income, with visitation terms to be negotiated. What Eleanor Vance would keep was sole custody of their unborn child, the mansion overlooking the Golden Gate that was held in a trust for her son to inherit one day, her real estate development firm, her family's wealth, and her entire world. It had, after all, always been her world. The gavel struck wood, the sharp sound echoing in the now quiet courtroom. As the proceedings concluded and a low hum of chatter filled the space, Eleanor calmly slid her single folder back into her briefcase. There was no need to hurry anymore. Across the aisle, Julian was engaged in a heated, hushed exchange with Peterson, whose polished demeanor had finally shattered, revealing the expression of a man who knew he'd been completely outmaneuvered. And then Julian's head snapped up. His eyes met Eleanor's for the first time all morning. She met his stare, her own expression unwavering and clear. There was nothing left to conceal, no role left to perform. She looked at him with the quiet, formidable strength of a woman who had sat in her home office at 2 a.m, staring at the damning proof of his betrayal. An invoice for a diamond necklace from a Parisian jeweler, a name that was not hers, and had not only endured it, but had entered this room because of it, knowing she would leave with everything intact. She was certain she would endure long after he became nothing more than a footnote in her story. He met her gaze across the polished boardroom table, and she pinpointed the exact moment the weight of it all truly crushed him. Not the termination clauses, his lawyers had debated those for weeks, but the fundamental truth of his position. The instant he finally understood that the empire he believed he was co-creating with her was never his to inherit, that the influence he thought he commanded was merely a reflection of her own, that the woman chairing the meeting was, and always had been, the name etched in glass on the skyscraper's lobby, Avance. His tenure was contractual. Her legacy was the foundation. He was the first to look away. Marcus was immediately by her side, his hand a light touch on her elbow. "Ready to go?" he murmured. "Yes," Ilara said. She closed her laptop and walked out of the boardroom without a single backward glance. Down in the echoing, climate-controlled parking garage, the same scent of concrete and ozone from the electric vehicle chargers, she slid into the driver's seat of her sedan and simply breathed, taking all the time she required. This time, there was no tablet left carelessly on the passenger seat displaying incriminating calendar invites. The seat was pristine. In about 3 weeks, a state-of-the-art infant carrier would be meticulously installed right there. She sat in the stillness. It was not the suffocating, empty quiet she remembered from that first night of realization. This was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a problem solved. The quiet that fell after the board voted was the silence after a controlled demolition, the unsettling calm when a structure has been cleanly removed. This was a different kind of quiet. This was the tranquility that follows a clearing storm. She powered on the car. At her brother Marcus's penthouse overlooking the lake, they ate pasta around the massive reclaimed wood table in Ilara's own kitchen. Marcus, her oldest friend Anya, and Ilara. The conversation carefully avoided the day's corporate upheaval. Instead, they talked about Anya's upcoming presentation at a medical conference in Geneva, Marcus's plans for a sailing trip in the Grenadines, and a new software patent Ilara was filing. It was a perfectly normal evening. Thea Sterling Vance was born on a Monday. Her arrival was at 5:32 in the evening, after a 17-hour labor that was demanding but ultimately straightforward. She was born in a private suite at the Lakeside Pavilion for Women, where Dr. Benning had been a leading perinatologist for over a decade. She was 6 pounds and 9 ounces, had a surprising amount of dark, wavy hair, and possessed an expression that Dr. Benning remarked belonged to an executive who believed she was already behind schedule on a major project launch. Marcus was in the family lounge. Anya was there too. Ilara hadn't explicitly asked them to come. She'd given them the estimated date, and when things started progressing around midnight the night before, she had sent a single brief message to their group chat. They were there when her car arrived. This alone felt like its own victory. At 5:32 p.m., Dr. Benning placed Thea on Ilara's chest for the immediate skin-to-skin contact they had discussed, just as all the modern protocols suggested. Thea was compact and warm and radiated the type of absolute certainty only newborns have, having just accomplished something incredible without yet knowing the world would train them to question such successes. Ilara held her daughter. The room settled into that special hush that follows a birth, a shared exhale, as if the very atmosphere recognized a fundamental change had occurred and was pausing to let it register. She looked down at Thea's face. Thea looked directly back. That serious expression was already present. It was hers, without a doubt. It was the face of a person who had arrived with a to-do list. "Hello there," Ilara whispered. Thea's gaze didn't waver. "I know," Ilara murmured. "I have a few things to organize, too." The frantic internal monologue, the one that had been raging for months, was now quieter than it had ever been and more certain. "I thought this moment holding her would be the happiest of my life, but also the most agonizing because of Julian. I was wrong. Lying here, I feel nothing about him at all. Not triumph, not sorrow, not anger, none of the baggage I thought I'd be carrying forever. There's only this warmth, this tiny respiration, this person. I was terrified of doing this alone, but I'm not on my own. I never was. I was just partnered with the wrong co-founder." Thea's hand stirred, her impossibly small fingers closing with surprising strength around Ilara's. The initial week was exactly what an initial week is, a recurring pattern of 3-hour feeding intervals, the shocking and profound smallness of a 6-pound human, and a particular type of exhaustion that impossibly holds something that isn't quite joy, but is far more resilient. The smart speaker in the corner of the Chicago hospital suite was on, playing a soft, looping track of ambient rainfall. A small silk pouch of chamomile was tucked into Alara's overnight bag. They were minor comforts, planned months before for a version of this experience that was never supposed to happen, but they were precisely what she needed now. Her brother Marcus delivered food each day, gourmet soups and artisan sandwiches designed for one-handed consumption, a practical detail Marcus had researched with the same intensity he applied to market analysis reports. Her friend Anya arrived on the second day with the hand-knitted merino wool blanket from the nursery. She settled into the visitor's armchair and held Thea for nearly 2 hours while Alara drifted into a profound, healing sleep, the first unbroken rest she'd had since it all began. When Alara awoke, Anya was observing Thea with a look of quiet, clinical fascination. "She has your exact same brow when she's concentrating," Anya said, her tone filled with absolute conviction. Her father, a renowned architect, visited on day 3. He stayed for 45 minutes, his usual reserved and thoughtful self, but just before he left, he placed a small, polished piece of granite from a building facade on the windowsill. It was a perfect dark gray square, the sort of sample you hold onto long after a project is finished. "For her collection," he offered, "if you'd like." Alara looked at the simple stone. "I would," she answered. Later that afternoon, an email notification from Julian's attorney pinged on her phone. "Congratulations! My office will reach out to coordinate a visitation schedule." Alara read the message once. She gently settled Thea into her bassinet, went to the small ensuite bathroom, and ran cold water over her wrists, a technique she used to ground herself before difficult negotiations. She saw her reflection in the mirror, depleted, without makeup, still in the hospital-issued gown, and, for a fleeting second, completely serene. She returned to her daughter's side, picked up her phone, and replied to the attorney, "All future communications are to be directed to my legal counsel." She set the phone down on the windowsill beside the granite square from her father and didn't check it again until the next day. The last piece of their shared life was formally dissolved on a Tuesday morning. Thea was 9 days old. Ava sat in her home office, the one with the good afternoon light, and dialed the number herself. The phone rang twice before a woman answered. "Ava," Celeste said, her voice quiet. "I'm calling to inform you," Ava stated, her tone even, "that everything is finalized. All legal matters are resolved. You don't have to be part of that lie for a single second longer." A long pause hung on the line. "Thank you," Celeste finally said. Thank you." "I'm not calling to be your savior," Ava clarified, because she was fundamentally a person who served the unvarnished truth. "I'm making this call because seeing you at 31 reminded me how it feels to force yourself to trust a man when facing reality is just too devastating." Another silence stretched between them. "And the little one?" Celeste asked softly. "She's perfect," Ava said, a genuine warmth in her voice. "So observant. She already seems to have a discerning palate." A sudden sharp laugh came through the phone, a sound of pure relief. "Good," Celeste said. "She gets that from you." "Yes," Ava agreed. "She certainly does." After hanging up, Ava sat in the quiet of her study. She moved to the living room where Olivia, in her high-tech swing, was captivated by the sunbeams dancing on the floor. Brewing a pot of Earl Grey, Ava looked out over her herb garden, her mind finally free. The breakthrough didn't strike like lightning. It was a quiet realization. It was the clarity that comes after the storm, when you're standing in your own kitchen with a warm mug and your baby is fascinated by a ray of light. The door was never locked, she thought. I was the executive chef of this entire life. I created the concept, built the menu, understood every ingredient. For too long, I believed it was incomplete without a man, but it was always whole. It just needed me to be the one to savor it. Now, it's us. This thought brought her to Dr. Peterson's clinic for Olivia's 2-month wellness check. In the waiting room, her phone buzzed. A text from her lawyer, Julia. Liam's team was asking about offshore investments again. Ava skimmed the text and looked at Olivia, who was mesmerized by a mobile of sea creatures. "Someone's making noise about the money again," she whispered. Olivia turned her thoughtful gaze to her mother. "You're right," Ava conceded. "It's completely unimportant." She put the phone away. A nurse called Olivia's name. As the exam room door clicked shut, Ava gave no more thought to Liam or the chaos of the last 4 months. The most important thing she had ever created wasn't a restaurant or a brand. It was this breath, this warmth. Outside, the Boston Harbor mist was lifting, giving way to the real spring, the kind that flourishes. I'm calling because seeing you now, at 32, it reminded me of that feeling, of forcing yourself to believe in a man because admitting the truth seems too destructive. I've been down that road myself. Another long silence stretched between them. "And the little one?" her mentor asked. "She's magnificent," Ilara said. "So focused. She already appears to have a very refined sense of taste." A sudden, bright laugh came from the other end of the line, the sound of someone releasing a pressure they'd held for a decade, caught off guard by a moment of genuine happiness. "Good," she said. "She gets that from her mother." "Yes," Ilara replied. "She absolutely does." After ending the call, she sat for a moment in the silence of her home office. Then she went to the great room where Thea was in her smart bassinet, captivated by the afternoon sun bouncing off a neighboring skyscraper and casting moving shapes on the ceiling, a fascination she applied to all new and luminous things. Ilara made a cup of green tea, then stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, allowing her thoughts to wander, unburdened by any strategic objective or crisis to manage. The epiphany didn't arrive like a sudden shock. It emerged as a quiet understanding in the warm afternoon light. It was the kind of insight that can only be reached after you've weathered the absolute worst, only to find yourself standing in your own home, holding a warm cup, with an infant who is entirely absorbed by a reflection of light. The access was never restricted. I was the chief architect of this software, this company, this life. I wrote the initial code. I designed the user interface. I understood every single function and dependency. And for years, I let myself think that without a male partner to share the credit, the enterprise wasn't complete. But it was always complete. It just needed the right end user to appreciate its power. That user was me all along. Now, the right users are us. The story had made a full loop, concluding exactly where it started, at the Vance Tower. The same steel and glass structure, the same private parking level, the same silent, high-speed elevator. It was time for Thea's 2-month checkup. Ilara had her in the infant carrier that had become a standard feature in her car since the day she brought her home. She walked through the revolving glass doors of the headquarters, across the marble lobby, and toward the executive wellness center she'd established on the 3rd floor. After checking in, they settled into chairs in the waiting area. Her phone vibrated inside her bag. It was a text from Arthur. The message read, "Julian's counsel is making inquiries about the Cayman Development Funds again. I'm handling it. Just wanted you to be aware. Don't let it distract you from the appointment." Eleanor gave the message a quick glance before looking down at baby Arthur, asleep in his carrier at her feet. Little Arthur was gazing up at the ceiling, where a mobile of minimalist architectural shapes was slowly turning. It was a sophisticated waiting room fixture, and the baby was giving it his full, serious attention. "Someone is making a fuss about the money again," Eleanor whispered to him. He remained captivated by the rotating shapes. "Your namesake is taking care of it," she assured him. Her son turned his contemplative gaze to his mother. "You are right," Eleanor agreed. "It is profoundly unimportant." She slipped the phone back into her purse. A nurse came to the doorway and called out Arthur's name. Eleanor lifted the infant carrier, carried her son toward the exam room, and gave no more thought to Julian, his lawyers, the development funds, or any of the debris from the past 4 months. Her focus was entirely on Arthur's weight and Arthur's length. There was Arthur's sober expression, the custom-made silver rattle from a family friend, and the sleek, modern planetarium mobile turning over his crib at home. I oversaw the construction of skyscrapers from the bedrock up, she thought. I can build this new life. I already have the blueprints. I always did. I just had to find them again. The greatest thing I ever developed wasn't a LEED certified high-rise, a portfolio of properties, or an urban skyline. It was this quiet breath, this solid warmth, this singular, remarkable, and irreplaceable new person studying his world and already knowing there were things to figure out. The door to the examination room clicked shut. Arthur took in the new surroundings with his watchful eyes. Eleanor looked at her son. Outside, the San Francisco fog was at last burning off, making way for the real spring, the undeniable spring, the kind that offers no apology for the winter that came before, the kind that simply arrives, the kind that builds. This story was meticulously designed, drafted, and constructed by our story architects to provide you with inspiration, connection, and a narrative that stands the test of time.